Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is cartoonist Ruben Bolling. Ruben, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thank you so much, Terrence. It's great to be on Comics Culture.
Ruben, you are a syndicated editorial cartoonist. So I'm wondering, as somebody who has to read the news for a living and then find a way to make a statement about it, but also in a way that will be either satirical or humorous, how do you kind of find that thread without feeling like it's just more bad news?
That has been my real challenge over the last few years, especially in this last year, is that I find the news and what's going on to be not funny at all. I find it to be alarming. I'll admit that I don't like to read the newspaper, or certainly I don't watch cable television. I find it too upsetting. So I sort of let the news come to me through osmosis, through social media, through talking to people. I will see headlines, but I really have stopped really delving into it, and I'm taking a much more impressionistic look at what's going on. I think I get enough. I certainly never want to know too much more unless I'm really want to educate, which I really don't want to do. I don't want to know too much more than my readers, because then I'm bringing something up that they don't know, and then it's hard to make a joke about it. But yeah, it's really hard. I try to take different angles into terrible situations, and I really try to sort of shock and express my own feelings about what's going on. But I always am, especially in the last year, I'm very aware that I don't want to make corny jokes. And I don't ever want to be corny, but be jokey about what's going on. I always want to express, the level of alarm that I feel.
It's not easy being in the news media. It's not easy being a journalist, certainly not easy being an editorial cartoonist, because in many ways you're required to make some sort of statement, especially editorial cartoonists. So, with so much negative energy towards those who have differing opinions on whatever the topic may be, how do you kind of make sure that you're making your point, but also insulating yourself from what might be some really negative stuff that you hear back on social media?
You called me an editorial cartoonist, which is fine, because that is what I do. I've been doing 95% political oriented comics for the last few years, but that hasn't always been the case. And I don't work for a newspaper that requires a political comic every 3 times a week or once a week. I have a weekly comic strip, and my in that weekly comic strip, Tom the Dancing Bug, I do whatever I want. So if I have to do a comic that's political, that's on me. Um, I've felt some urgency to do a lot of political stuff because that's what I've been thinking about. Um, but I don't always do it. And in fact, the week that we're currently in, that we're taping this, the comic that went out is one that's called Super Fun Pack Comics. It's about a high school that uses artificial intelligence and a Dennis the Menace type of kid and a couple negotiating good cop, bad cop at a used car dealership and all these other little things. And it's very absurdist and silly. No one's making me do what I hate doing, which is commenting on the news. I'm making myself do it, which is what I do most of the time. I do get blowback from on my comics on what I write about, because America is so polarized. But at the same time, we're also very sort of siloed. So the only time I get blowback is when one of my comics really blows up, and then sort of penetrates outside of the people who agree with me, who are getting the comic because they're looking on a website that buys the comic, or they're looking at, or they're subscribers certainly to my subscription service. But very often it'll go outside the social media, and then I get blowback from the other side. That's for the really very viral ones. A lot of the times I'm sort of insulated from that, just because people who want to see a certain point of view can now only see that point of view. And that's true for me too. I don't see comedy from the right, because I've made choices on what I watch, and so I don't see that. So I guess they're not the right isn't seeing me unless something, big happens. I did a comic recently about ice that really blew up, and then I got the comments back. Thankfully, I'm a small enough a fish that it's all safe so far. It's nothing has gotten dangerous or threatening.
You mentioned the media landscape, and my background is mass communication. And it's fascinating for me to see how we have sort of created these islands of information for whichever particular opinion you're looking for. So, as a cartoonist who's distributing your stuff, not necessarily in a newspaper, but in a way that you have to, people have to look for it. How do you sort of, find that audience?
My career has changed so much. I started out as a newspaper cartoonist. I started in 1990. So there was no alternative to be a comic strip artist. And so I was in newspapers. And in some ways, that was great because it went out to everybody. I mean, that's where I wouldn't, there was no social media, so I couldn't get any blowback. And you'd have to actually write a letter to me if you disagreed with what I said. But cartoonists at that time would be in a city's newspaper, and everybody read it. And there'd be maybe a cartoonist on the left, maybe one on the right. I was mostly in alternative newspapers, so I was had maybe that was sort of a leftist audience. But newspapers were supposed to go out to everybody and to appeal to everybody. Now there, now there's no gatekeepers. You don't have to convince an editor to take on your comic strip. It's a much more of a meritocracy. You put it out online, and then the numbers will be there if what you're doing is good. But it does tend to put you into that silo. So you don't, now everybody is choosing exactly the little niche things that they want to see. I want to see this columnist, I want to see this cartoonist, I want to see this guy on Instagram. And so you don't see the other side. And I think it's one of the biggest media problems that we have is that because we have these silos sort of diverge, and people who watch one side have no idea of even the reality that the people who are living on the other side are living in.
I'm thinking about the title of your comic, Tom the Dancing Bug, and I'm just wondering, as you are developing your pitch, I guess, to a syndicate, if or going to speak to that paper, that indie paper, are you coming to them with like a literal character of Tom the Dancing Bug? And please forgive my ignorance, but I'm just trying to figure out how you frame your idea in that pitch, and then allow it to sort of blossom into Dennis the Menace versus AI.
When I started the comic strip professionally in 1990, I did everything myself. There was no one else. I didn't have a syndicate. I did in 1997. I got syndicated, but in the beginning, I just did a comic for one newspaper. And then I began, began selling it to other newspapers in other geographical areas. And the editors would always ask at that time, where's Tom the Dancing Bug? There's no Tom the Dancing Bug. Why isn't there a Tom the Dancing Bug? And I would explain it's silly, it's absurdist. I made it up. I'll tell you the origin of the name. When I was in school, I submitted the comic strip to the school newspaper. Um, and I wanted it to be totally free form, like nothing else. Every week is different, and that's still true. Different styles, different formats. I wanted it to be totally free format and free. And they said, "Well, what's the name of it?" And I said, "There'll be no name. It'll just have this here's a comic strip." And they said, "Well, we're going to run it, but it's got to have a name." So I thought of the stupidest name I could think of. And earlier that day, my friend had gotten in class had gotten a bug on his pen and was twisting the pen back and forth like that, and so the bug was sort of doing a dance. So I just said the name of the comic should be Tom the Dancing Bug, and I remembered riding my bike back to my apartment saying, "Actually, I like that. That actually fits." So in the 90s, it got a lot of questions and blowback from editors. But over time, I think it's stopped, and I think it's because people have gotten used to like nonsense names. I don't think they really existed in 1990, but a lot of like band names got sillier and more. Really, it's Monty Python's Flying Circus, as that's it's sort of comes from that kind of thing. I think people have gotten used to it. I'm almost never asked about it now. Certainly, I'm almost never selling the comic strip to editors anymore. Now it's all online. So it's all social media. Here's Tom the Dancing Bug. Make of it what you will. Join my subscription service. The strip is called Tom the Dancing Bug. Come along for the ride or don't. But you're not going to have an opportunity to ask me why it's called that. So if the name is sort of emblematic of the fact that I really wanted to, and I still want the comic strip to be totally free and fresh every week, and really as silly and absurdist as I can.
You mentioned Monty Python's Flying Circus, and I was actually going to mention that because that's one of those names that the BBC was, trying to come up with a name for the show, and they thought that would be hysterical. It also is that absurdist humor that people of a certain age, my age, I remember watching Monty Python on PBS, and we'd come on Sunday nights at 11 o'clock, and I'd stay up late and tune in and watch it, and it informed my humor growing up in the 80s, and it seems like it's informed your humor. So, as somebody who is looking at the world, not necessarily with the setup, the punchline, and the drum, fill,
Right.
How are you sort of crafting a story? You're talking about, again, I'm going to go back to Dennis the Menace and AI. How are you sort of coming up with this view that AI, I'm assuming, is going to be a menace?
My influence, first of all, I loved comics growing up, and I do a newspaper comic, or a weekly comic strip. It's no longer a newspaper comic. And it's often political. But I loved superhero comics. I loved every kind of comic growing up. And so superheroes, comic strips, I loved Scooby-Doo, whatever it was. If it was a drawing that talked, I was into it. So that was definitely an influence. But when I started the comic strip, Tom the Dancing Bug, I think that my sort of guiding principle were, I think, two things, maybe three. Mad Magazine. You must be familiar with Mad Magazine. I probably couldn't have articulated this, but looking back on it, if I could have, I would have said, I want to do a Mad Magazine where I'm all the artists and all the writers. So I would do a spy versus spy, and a lighter side of, I'd have different formats and different characters, all with different styles, and every week would be a different feature from a Mad Magazine. Um, and that's very related to my other influence, which was sketch comedy and SNL and Monty Python. Certainly later in my career, Mr. Show, blew my mind. Kids in the Hall. I love all that stuff. And so my but they, like Mad Magazine, are sort of sketch oriented, premise oriented. You set up a premise and then you play with it. Those were my influences in terms of doing my comic. That's what I wanted to do. I think you were totally right when you juxtapose that to, the setup and the gag, which I did not want to do. And that's sort of the older style of, Broomhilda and Beetle Bailey, which actually, is the analogy to on TV, to the older style of TV comedy, the Johnny Carson sort of one-liner, very quick joke. So I was more influenced by sketch comedy, Mad Magazine. I wanted to develop a premise and then have fun with it, veer in unexpected directions. That's what I loved. And yeah, I've been doing it for 35 years now. The comic has gotten more political. Aside from, my occasional excursions, it's gotten less absurdist than it was when I first started, and I was really trying hard to be, Monty Python-esque and really be totally unpredictable. I remember thinking when I started, someone asked me, so the people would ask me, like, how did you think of that? And what I always thought of was, I want people to, when they read my comic, to think not how did he think of that, but why did he think of that? Well, why would you come up, why would you think of that comic? Why would you come up with a giant alien who lands on Earth only to take a nap and leave? All the weird, giant wombats wandering the streets. I wanted it to be very strange. And it was when it started, and it still veers into that. But now a lot of it is sort of, satire and parody based on current events.
There is an evolution that we have as people as we start out with an idea, and I tell my students this, we have an idea of where we want to end up in life, and then as we're walking, we start to veer off from that path. We're not even aware of it because we're looking in a different direction somehow, and we end up where we are. And a lot of times it's better than where we thought we would be. And as an artist, you are constantly evolving to the point where you've, you've developed your voice. You've found that style that is more than just kind of, I want something unpredictable. Now this is the voice that I've discovered along the way.
Yes.
And in the years that you've been working on the strip, I'm noticing that, technology has really influenced a lot of what cartoonists do. And I see behind you, there's a drawing board. And I'm wondering if you are still working in the traditional tools of ignorance, the board, the pen, the ink, or if you've moved on to, a tablet and maybe some stylus.
That's it. Wow. Yeah. No, I still draw the comic by hand on this big wooden thing behind me. But then when I started, I would draw everything, and what I held up in my hand would be the comic, and I would photocopy that and send it out to clients, and eventually photocopy it and send it off to my syndicate. Or actually, I would send the originals to my syndicate, but that was it. Now I draw it with blue pencil. I ink over that. Then I put it into the computer, scan it, put it in the computer, and then I erase the blue line, and then I manipulate it. Sometimes I add lettering, I add effects. I never blacken, shaded areas. I just leave it and know that I'm going to point and click and it'll be done in a second. If I make a mistake, I just write in the margin, fix thumb. And so when I go on, then on the, so, and then I go on the computer and I fix everything up. And so a lot of the stuff is done on the computer. And now the original comic usually can look very different from what ends up going out. Now I color the comic. When I first started, it was in black and white. Now it's all done. I do the colors on the computer, so it does look very different. It's kind of a hybrid.
It's interesting growing up, and I'm sure your experience is similar. The daily paper was always black and white comic strips, and Sunday would be in glorious color and a lot more panels on the page. And then sometime in the, I guess it was mid-90s, they switched over to color every day, and I'm still not used to it. I still prefer my comics to be in glorious black and white. So as you make that move into full color and certainly, making it easier with those digital tools, are you finding that it's found that other voice for you because you can do something with a color that you couldn't do when it was just a simple black and white strip?
Oh, sure. I mean, I went into the world of color kicking and screaming because I wanted to only work in black and white. But then eventually, the print, and at that time the newspapers were all in black and white. But then the importance of newspaper distribution began to get less and less, and the importance of the web presence began to get more and more, and the web you had to be in color. So I sort of missed the color aspect of newspapers. It's in newspapers still today, and people do run it in black and white or color depending on what the newspaper wants. It's much less now. I really am only thinking about online, and yeah, now I'm used to color. I think about it when I'm drawing it. I think about I don't know if this will be clear, what this is here, but but once it's colored in, it'll be clearer. So I sort of draw with the color in mind. I just did one where a couple go into a house, and it's sort of like a horror story. And as I wrote it, I decided I'm going to make the colors darker and darker as they realize that they're in a horror story. And so it was a lot of fun. And, I worked with the lighting, and by the end there were, big shadows and a lot of color shading on faces as though like the light's coming from below. I'm not that good at it, but good enough as with my comic strip a lot. This is sort of my guiding principle of my art. Good enough to get the idea across, and to get the reader to know what I was trying for and to have some fun with it.
And because you switch styles up, and because you are essentially you're allowing yourself to continue to evolve and grow and learn as an artist, are you finding that you've crossed boundaries that you never thought you'd be able to cross in terms of the way you can put something on a page to maybe capture a style that wasn't in your toolbox when you first started?
Oh yeah, one of the things that I've really started to do and I didn't do when I started. And it's been a revelation for me and so much fun, especially when I'm dealing with such dark topics now, is that I satirize and parody existing styles very often, and I have recurring formats where I will, use the style of something, and very often what I do is I use a style from that I knew in my childhood that was innocent and wholesome, and really to me beautiful and almost holy, and then put it into today's terms and sort of desecrate it and show how dark it is. And I guess an example of that is I was really happy with the way it turned out when I did my first Richard Scarry parody. Have you heard? You know the children's illustrator Richard Scarry. He draw. It's not comics, but he's a children's author, and he would draw these like little busy towns with a cute little pig who was a grocer, and a worm who has a broom, and a raccoon who's a doctor, and they're just adorable figures. And it would always be like a big full page of all these busy little characters that kids could like just stare at and see all the busy little animals. I would do them now, but I set it in the current world. And instead of, a grocer and I'm going to try to think of examples of what I've done, but, it's all dark stuff. There'd be like an ICE agent, just as cute. I make them as cute as I possibly can, but an ICE agent, grabbing a migrant and putting him into a van. So uh, I've done uh, Calvin and Hobbes parodies where I draw like Bill Watterson. Um, but instead of Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin and his imaginary tiger friend, I have little Donald as a little 7-year old, and his imaginary publicist, which looks like a grown up Donald Trump. And I've done so many of those. I've done Peanuts. I call them Q nuts. So I'll have Linus waiting for in the pumpkin patch for like a follower of Q waiting for Trump to start his purge of the pedophiles in Hollywood, and he's waiting because he has so much faith that Trump will do this. So I love Linus. Linus is one of my favorite characters, concepts in the universe, and it pains me to paint stuff this way, but that's what I was talking about before. I do that to sort of convey, to myself and to the audience that comes along with me, how alarmed I am at the changes that are going on in our society. But to go back to your question about, yeah, I mean, I I'm glad that people think that I do an accurate job of drawing in those other styles. I think I'm like 80%. I see myself through it. And maybe that kind of works because you see Calvin and Hobbes, but it's not just like Watterson. And you also see a little bit of Ruben Bolling, that's 20%. And the same with Peanuts and Richard Scarry and lots of superheroes. I do tons of, I draw like, I try to draw, I fail much harder when I try to draw like Jack Kirby, but I try a lot, and John Romita. Um, so you know, I am happy with again, I do the best I can, and I think I convey it. I wish I could get to 100%. Like there's a cartoonist named Robert Sikoryak who does these parodies that are just you can't believe that the original artist didn't do them. But as a weekly cartoonist, and also frankly with limited talent, I just can't get to 100%. I can get to 80 or 90%, and that's what I got to live with.
Ruben, they are telling me that we are just about out of time. If the folks watching at home wanted to find you on the web, where can they find you?
They can find me on the website, tomthedancingbug.com, where I have all the information. Clover Press is putting out a multi-volume set of the complete Tom the Dancing Bug. As of later this year, it will be complete. There will be 8 complete volumes. Volumes 1 and 2 are coming out. Are going to be the Kickstarter's launches in October. Once those books come out, it'll be an 8 volume set of the complete Tom the Dancing Bug. They're at cloverpress.us, but also information's at tomthedancingbug.com.
Well, Ruben, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Terrence. I really enjoyed it.
I'd like to thank everyone at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.